Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Holden's 11. Tonight, I got a special guest that I'm really excited to talk to him. Our topic is going to be terrific. Please welcome Jon Westhoff, comic book creator and publisher for Drumsticks of Doom and also Depowered. It's coming to Kickstarter here in the next couple of weeks, Jon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, thanks for coming. I'm a fan of your work, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you about some of these things we got here tonight. The topic's going to be a fun one. The topic is the top 11 non-superhero comic titles. It's going to be a lot of fun, right? Because one of the things that I love to do is to turn people on to, comics maybe that they haven't heard of or that they haven't seen. We're going to talk about a couple of the big ones, but, being a comic fan, as you know, sometimes it's hard to get people interested in it because when you tell somebody comics, right away they think of Batman punching the Joker, right?
Sure.
So as we both know, and as included in both of our writing styles, comics can be much more than that. So we're going to talk about some of the ones that we love and some of the ones that have potentially influenced our work. So without further delay, let's launch right into it. Our number 11 tonight, V for Vendetta. That's by Alan Moore and David Lloyd from 1982. Are you an Alan Moore fan, Jon?
I would say that I am. I'm not the most versed. I wouldn't say I've read all of his work, which, probably should get around to more of it. But I cannot think of anything I've read of his that I didn't really enjoy.
Yeah, he's definitely one of those characters who's kind of polarizing, right? Like he's in these interviews and he's, I don't want to say a kook, but, he's into the, the occult and the magic. And of course, he's got this longstanding beef with DC over the Watchmen. Definitely an interesting character. I stumbled across V for Vendetta in 1982 when it was being published new. And I was already a fan of Alan Moore, but this was the first time I'd seen, this is sort of one of his more dystopian works. You've got the future of British society, which is sort of, the government controlling everybody. And if anything, it's as relevant today as it was then.
For sure. This is one you can tell why, one in the many of his works from that 10 or 15 year window where he just couldn't do anything wrong. I mean, everything he wrote was so impactful to the community, and a huge part of why we continue to see, awesome non-superhero books throughout the community is Alan Moore is a huge part of that.
Yeah, I've read some of his latest interviews, and he just really seems to have this grudge against the comic community, and not necessarily the community, but the publishers who have admittedly done him pretty wrong over the years. So I kind of understand it, and I think in a way it lends to his cachet. It's like he's biting the hand that feeds him. And, he's even lashed out at a couple of the artists that he's worked with for doing interviews and that kind of thing. And he does terrific superhero work, but it'd be fair to say that that's some of the work that he dislikes the most. So I always find that kind of interesting about him. He's definitely an interesting character.
Definitely. Every time he opens his mouth, you that he's just kind of playing the curmudgeonly old, guy that doesn't want to be involved in it, but he continues to make comics and he's still part of the community. But, he has been burned a few times. So maybe he's one of the fortunate people who's in a position where he can be honest and he doesn't have to hold anything back and he can just say what he wants. Because everybody else around him says he's, the nicest guy and a committed grandparent and all those good things. So I have no reason to believe that he's just this weird wizard who sits in a tower and just,
Right. And I guess it doesn't hurt that he looks kind of like Rasputin.
Right.
Which, speaking of Alan Moore, I wanted to group these two together since we're kind of on the subject, but our number 10 is From Hell from 1989. That's Alan Moore and, of course, Eddie Campbell on interiors, and it tells the story of the Jack the Ripper mythos. And I was a big fan of that. It was made into a movie a couple of years ago with, I'm pretty sure that's Johnny Depp in there.
Right.
Did you see that movie?
I did not. I did see V for Vendetta, but not From Hell.
Yeah, it was a pretty decent film. It's I like Johnny Depp to start with, and it's one of those things that Jack the Ripper has just captivated audiences for well, better than a century now, right? So I don't know how well the movie holds up, but I particularly liked his theory that Jack the Ripper was being protected by the royal family, and sort of like it was basically like the royal family and the Illuminati knew about him, and they make the implication that it was the physician, right, was covering it all up. This Sir William Withy Gull was the guy who covered it all up. And I guess many of the elements of From Hell, when you go and look them up, they're factual, which that's not my way of saying that this is a true story, right? Because that's still up for conjecture, I suppose. But I guess the two of them really did a lot of research to try and make this compelling case for the royal family and its connection to Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, and obviously he does that a lot in his works. He's a huge literary buff, and pulls that into a ton of his different stories. So yeah, again, this is another one where again, he was in his heyday, still talked about year in and year out.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that so many years have gone by since some of these seminal works. It definitely shows you how comics, and by the way, many people would say that this would be slated into a graphic novel more so than a comic. And so I should take a quick second and review the rules here for the top 11 non-hero comic titles, which is it has to be released in what we call an episodic format. And more clearly, something that would have come out once a month or once every couple of months, something like that, and then made into a collected. For that reason, you're going to see some of the titans of the list are not going to be included. Things like Mouse and Persepolis and some of the great graphic novel works. And because we got to make the line somewhere, right? It's hard to make a top list of any kind of properties. But I was a huge fan of From Hell when it came out, and just the amount of detail and the amount of like you said, the research and the literary effort that he put into it. I don't think there's anything to compare it to today. And it's 33 years later.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, others, other authors have done that, spoilers, we might talk about Bill Willingham in a little bit.
We will.
Have done that, but yeah, I mean, Alan Moore is definitely the master of it.
Well, and I'd like to use that to segue into our number 9 when we talk about these sort of polarizing comic creators. Because in a second here, we're going to talk about Frank Miller. He's our number 9. That's Sin City from 1991. And boy, this series really just ballooned into many properties, including a fairly popular movie directed by Robert Rodriguez. And the thing that I remember about it the most, well, the first thing is I'm a sucker for gangster stories. Are you like a gangster guy at all?
No, I wouldn't do that.
No?
But I do like Sin City.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Well, I've always been a fan of things like The Godfather and Goodfellas and Scarface, that kind of thing. And when, and I guess Sin City is a little bit more of like a pulp style of those stories. And, he sort of designed it in this striking black and white style that, it's, speaking of black and white comics, we'll get to you in a second there. But, when used correctly, the black and white storytelling medium can be incredibly powerful. Can you share with us your thoughts on black and white comics, John?
I love black and white comics. I was definitely one of those people, when I was a kid or whatever, I was like, but, I had a few boxes from, my father's friends or uncles or things like that. And there was always a few in there. Old Ninja Turtles, stuff like that. And it was like, oh, this is so weird. And then it wasn't until I was much older that I really appreciated it. Things like Walking Dead and stuff like that really, really cracked that open for a lot of people, including myself. And there's some other great ones, but I will admit, I'm not the hugest Frank Miller fan as far as his art. I get, why people are into it. It's just not my favorite style, but Sin City is him at his height, using it perfectly. Like you said, he said, I'm going to do it like this with spot colors. And it makes the comic so much better. And it's only can be done in comics too. I mean, the movie was great, but you see, it's not right. The same. Those striking images that he made were just perfect.
Right.
And you can understand why this book, it's again, still talked about today.
Right. And he sort of has this, the writing is pretty solid too. He sort of has this 1940s hard-boiled detective way of talking that, it's a very memorable type of character that first I should mention, in the Sin City series, there's many characters. It's not necessarily about one character. There's Marv and there's Dwight and, there's various strippers all around, but each one was very memorable in their own right. And I don't know if, maybe the black and white art sort of lends itself to strong character development.
I mean, yeah, there's an argument for that, right? It's just something about it, pulls you into that comic page, especially again when it's done, by a master like Frank Miller. And you're right, it was him really coming together in all things: the writing, the style of it, and then of course the art. Everything really hits in Sin City.
Just to remind our viewers, Jon's not just a writer, but a letterer also. And that's one of the things in Sin City that I thought was particularly effective is he kind of does this, what I call a negative lettering. Like, say, for example, it'd be the big words boom, and it would be hollow, but the images would be inside the letters. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that.
It's pretty neat. Like it would be like, the outline of the letters and the art is actually inside the letters. That was the first time I'd been exposed to that.
It's cool.
But I'm a sucker for great lettering. And as we were saying backstage, I admire the fact that you're a letterer, and it's something I'm going to take you up on your offer to learn a little bit more about lettering. I've done some amateur lettering. Speaking directly, I'm not very good at it, but it is something that as a craft, I admire it. And, my hat's off to you. I got a lot of respect for people that letter.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great skill to learn, and it helps as a writer too. So I think but partly it's out of necessity, early on, not having other people to do it, not having a budget to do it. And, but it's really helped me. And I think it helps you with the comic process, even just learning to letter, then you can understand your letterers, prepare your scripts and things better for them. It could just help your whole process.
Sure, I totally agree. And it's something that I forget if I mentioned, I actually, before I send my pages to the letterer, I do actually letter them here on a very primitive program called Comic Life. It's a Mac program. This is strictly so I can get the sense of the pacing of the page. And I don't even say to the letterer, hey, do it like this. It's not my end goal. But at least I want to have a feel for the rhythm of the words on the page. And in many cases, I do the editing after my rough pass of lettering.
Yeah, and that's great. I can, do it as I go, but that's a good way to do it, because otherwise you're going to get it back from the letterer, and he's going to say, you have 35 words in this balloon. I have room for maybe 10. What do you want to cut? So that happens, often with you have to move stuff around. So I think that's good.
Yeah. And not to mention the fact that, lettering is not, of course, just lettering. It's also a strong amount of graphic design skill.
It definitely is. I mean, you just mentioned it now. You see when a master does it, like Joe Carmagna or Nate Picos is another one, and then of course Frank Miller and those great hand letterers of the day. It's just, wow, it's another letter. I wish to someday get to that level. My graphic design is not anywhere near where it needs to be, but it's fun to learn on the page.
Yeah, Jon, one of the things I like about your work that shows in it is you have a very keen sense of what the classics are. And we're going to talk about that further as we get close to the end, but not just in the homage covers, but even in some of the ways that the pages are laid out. And I can see, oh man, this guy's learning from the greats, as it were. And I think you do a really good job with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm a fan of lettering too. What are your thoughts on, like, when you talk about somebody like Todd Klein, when he was lettering Sandman, they have what I call like the colored word balloons, or, different fonts, like when Lucifer speaks, it's in kind of this ornate font, that kind of thing. Do you like those types of graphic styles?
I do, if done well. Like Sandman's a good example, but I've seen some recently, like, some independent comics where they try to give each speaking person a different font. Right. And that, you can tell they're not at the same level. So sometimes it works for me, sometimes it doesn't. Font choice is a big thing. So yeah, when you're a master like Todd Klein and you can do it, so amazingly well, sure. But other times it's like, just get out of the way of the comic and let the character speak. because otherwise then it kind of pulls you into looking at the word balloon or trying to figure out what it says.
Right. Yep, exactly right, sir. I've often said that if you notice the font or you notice the word balloon, that means your letterer just overpowered the scene.
Yeah. I think who was I reading recently? I think it's Russ Wooten on Jonathan Hickman's books. He does the reverse a lot, where it's just black word balloon with white lettering, which I wish I did more often, because that ends a real cool feel. You feel like, oh, the person talking must, that's an easy way to kind of signify that. Stuff like that, you can tell, okay, they wanted to do something different, but they didn't want to go, totally out of left field and take you out of it. So
gotcha. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Let's move on to number 8. I'm a fan of this one. This book came out in 1988. This is our number 8, Hellblazer. You know a little bit about this one?
Yeah. So of the ones we've mentioned, this is probably the one I'm most familiar with, and that's thanks to a buddy of mine who I've worked with for a long time in comics. His name is Bob Ornelas. He introduced me. He was really encouraging me. He's like, one of his favorite characters is John Constantine, who is the Hellblazer, if people don't know. Spun out of the this one. I do feel like you're a little bit cheating on your own rules, because he came out of Swamp Thing and the superhero universe and stuff like that.
Yeah, good point, man. Good point. Yeah.
But he is definitely his own thing, and it's so great now that he's really gotten away from it. I know there's been a few times where they pulled him back into the main DC books, but Hellblazer, I liked the movie. That was my first experience. So coming into the books, I was like, oh, okay, now I get why people were kind of up in arms about the movie. But I just like his character. I've actually,
Remind me why people were up in arms about the movie. I forget now.
Well, because he's English, he's blonde. He
it
talks
wasn't
with an English
a close representation.
Yeah, and it wasn't. Keanu Reeves was definitely not what people think of as Constantine. Right. And these days that's kind of old hat, right? We change people around, their hair color, their skin color, their gender, whatever. But in that case, I kind of was like, okay, I get it, because that was a huge part of his personality, his mythos, who he was. But that's okay. It's still, I think it was okay as its own movie universe. And as far as the books, the Garth Ennis stuff. I've read a little bit of the Peter Milligan stuff as well. I haven't read it enough. I mean, he's definitely a character I want to read more of, and he seems like he's a character where there's so many like evergreen titles. You can't say that with a lot of these longer running books, where it's like, read one of these 6 graphic novels, they're all great.
Yeah.
He's a character that man, if they just nail a good story with him, it's just so good.
It's so good. And I was a fan of him. And of course, I was exposed to him in Swamp Thing. And by the way, you make a very good point, John. I can't tell you that you're wrong here. And I almost excluded him from the list based on his close proximity to Swamp Thing, who's kind of a hero, right? But on the other hand, John doesn't really have powers per se or anything like that. It's a little bit more of what I would call a supernatural title. So I kind of gave him a pass, and particularly in the writing style, it's fantastic, but it's not necessarily, it's more cerebral, I guess, is what I would say. He tends to think his way out of things. And of course, there's mystical elements, but there's very few scenes where he's punching his way out of the scenario that he's in. And one of my favorites was, if you remember this one, remember when he had lung cancer, and do you remember how he defeated his lung cancer?
And that's the first series that I read of his, again, suggested by my buddy. And it's just, that's like the one you need to read, the Garth Ennis. Yeah. Yes. But I do remember.
Yeah. So he had to, he sold his soul to the devil, which at that time, hell was ruled by a triumvirate. There was 3 of them. And so that they couldn't claim his soul, because they would all be fighting over possession of it, and it would destabilize hell. And that's like a perfect example of like the kind of way that John Constantine solves his problems,
Yeah, by making bigger problems for himself. Yeah, he finds his way out.
Exactly. Our number 7, and this is going to be a good one. I can't wait to hear what you think of this one. Number 7, Fables from 2002. This is by Bill Willingham and Mark Buckingham on art. And this went on for how many issues? I think it's like 110, something like that. It's a very long running series. Yeah. And it'd be fair to say that now this is 20 years ago too. And here's a guy that is still influencing modern indie creators in a pronounced way, in my opinion. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. I was definitely a superhero guy. So when you like, when you brought up this list, it kind of brought me back to when, it wasn't until my mid-20s, I've been reading for, a decade, when finally I had some friends like really push me into different directions. And Fables was one of the books at the time that I picked up. It was, several trades in at the time, and was just blown away. I didn't think I would be into fairy tale fantasy, but people just talk about it as one of those books you got to read it. And I don't think it's talked about enough. It is just such a unique, such a at the time, I don't know how to say it, progressive or just such a good book of that era.
Yeah.
I will admit I never did finish the series. I loved the series up for the first 75 issues or so, which Bill Willingham even admitted that he was kind of encouraged by DC to kind of continue the series because of its success.
Right.
It felt like it had a natural conclusion, and then it was kind of had a second win, which was good. I just haven't gotten around to finishing it. But those first 75 issues or so are some of the best
Gold
comics, period.
Yeah. And by the way, it's also a great one to and by the way, to me, comics and graphic storytelling are open to all ages, all genders, all peoples. Okay. But if you happen to have a female friend who says something like, well, I don't really like comics because she might potentially be hung up on what she thinks comics are, I've noticed that, if you turn her on to Fables, they love it. And they almost always say something like, wow, I didn't know comics could be like this. So it's whenever I have any kind of female friend who happens to not like comics, the first one I kind of recommend is Fables.
Fables is a good one. You again, not to spoil, there'll be another one on the list too that I would recommend.
Yeah, okay.
To those who identify as female, it seems to, at least. But even for me, like Fables was like I wasn't branching out enough, and then I said, wow, I didn't know comics could be like this. It's so, and of course, just like Alan Moore, Bill Willingham is no slouch when it comes to picking great artists. So it's a stunningly gorgeous book. So that helps.
You're right. Yeah.
It's something else.
And it's definitely something that, the influence is still felt today. You and I are both Kickstarter guys. And if you look through Kickstarter at any given moment, you're going to see, probably 40% of the projects are reimagined fairy tales, what I call the edgy fairy tale.
Yeah.
So, that's something that, well, it's hard to keep something like that going, isn't it? And, we always want to be original, but when I look at those titles, I often say, oh, well, this one owes a debt to Fables.
For sure.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly, probably. All right. So our next item on the list, John, is probably going to cause a little bit of division. So we'll see if you and I can fight this one out, or maybe the viewers can do it in the comics. And the reason why is we're going to say things like, well, is that a comic or is that a manga? Or as I say, a manga. I know that's not really the right way to pronounce it, but I say manga. Number 6, Scott Pilgrim from 2004. That's by Brian Lee O'Malley. He's a Canadian, I believe.
Canadian making a manga.
Yeah.
What's
and are you first off, are you a Scott Pilgrim fan?
I am a Scott Pilgrim fan. You mentioned, that we're Kickstarter creators. If you look on my recent Kickstarter, it's one of the influences for the book. It's one of the first times I really felt like I saw music in a book, for me at least, at the time that I recall. And I just really loved that part of it, that Scott was in a weird band and I was in a weird band at the time.
Right.
I just love that part of it. I think Scott Pilgrim belongs on any list like this. I think it was a game changer at the time. And
Right.
I think a lot of Americans or Canadians or whoever, Western creators started to see that style of laying out a page in a book, just the little books. When I picked it up, I was like, I don't know if I've ever read a tiny book. Is this for a kid? Like, what is this tiny book?
It's
very
very
black and white. What's going on?
It's what I would call visually inventive. And it was so different from what everybody else was doing. And by the way, manga was around. That part wasn't new. Yeah. But what he did with it was new. And it's like you said, he tied music into it and, great character development, I thought.
And video games.
Yeah, video games were in there. And by the way, that was made into a pretty cool film too. Did you see that film?
I did, and that's probably one of the best
Is it?
book to film adaptations.
Yeah. I mean, they even tried to translate some of the visual inventiveness into the film, which I appreciate. That's something that I dig, is when they try and get the feel of the source material, and that's one where they really did. You know, it's hard to say if something is. I didn't want to exclude it based on being a manga, but I also felt that it was so influential, I'd have been doing us all a disservice if I didn't put it on the list, because again, these are things that we love and that you and I love to talk about, right? So if we love it, viewers, if you haven't seen Scott Pilgrim, or if you haven't read Scott Pilgrim, definitely check this one out. It's definitely one of the best non-hero titles, and it'll change what you think about comics.
You'll get no division from me on that. It's only 6 volumes. I would recommend the black and white, but there is a color version now.
Oh, there's a color version?
Yeah, they went back and recolored it like they did with Bone. I think to get a second wave out of it.
You know what? I didn't know that. I'll have to check that out.
I haven't read the colored version, but check it out.
Yeah. For our next choice here, John, let's move into something a little bit more modern. And I chose this one because it was just, well, first of all, I'm a fan of the author, all points considered, and it was just developed into an Amazon series. I haven't seen the Amazon series yet, so maybe somebody can tell me a little bit about it in the comments. But this is our number 5, Paper Girls by Brian K. Vaughan. That's from 2015. Are you familiar with Paper Girls?
I'm only in name.
Gotcha. It's a little bit of a time travel caper, and it's full of it's got like these alternate realities, and these paper girls are going through time to save this so this alien civilization is what it is. But the reason why I like it is it starts out with such an innocuous premise. Hey, it's these 4 paper girls, and then of course it turns out it's this interdimensional conspiracy in this whole bit. And I like the way they translated the very simple into the somewhat bizarre. I'm a fan of Brian K. Vaughan's writing, and to me, he's right up there with the Alan Moores of the world. I haven't seen the series, so we'll have to see how that pans out. But again, if you think you don't like comics for any reason, this is definitely one of the ones you'll pick up, and you're going to say something like, whoa, I didn't think it would be like that.
Yeah, I can definitely understand why you added it here. To me, it's just, I can't doubt it, because everything I pick up from him, I really enjoy. I can't think of anything I've read from BKV that I haven't really enjoyed. So it's something I've heard nothing but great things about. But yeah, it sounds like an amazing premise, and something people should definitely check out. And every time he puts out a book, it finds its way onto these kind of top 10 lists, because that's just the kind of writer he is. He creates a buzz in the community every time he does anything.
And it would be fair to say, in my case, he has influenced my work a little bit. Even in the case of Paper Girls, which actually I've only read the first volume of it. I haven't read the second volume yet. And I actually wrote my story before reading Paper Girls, but still there's a little bit of the influence in there, which is that I like stories that have sort of, I guess for lack of a better word, I'm going to say alien conspiracy. And I think it's something that translates very well into putting a regular human character into sort of this really impossible, weird, and somewhat surreal scenario, and then see how they respond to it. So I got a new book coming out that's Call of the Cryptid, and that's ours is very much along those lines. It's basically just the short pitch is a young girl has an alien encounter. And after the alien encounter, she has the ability to communicate with these extra dimensional creatures.
Ooh.
And it's full of weirdness. I try to pattern it after, some of the really weird stuff.
Nice.
Now, speaking of weird stuff, this is one where I got my start in enjoying comics. Well, not really my start, but I'd been reading comics since I was a kid. But in the late 80s, there was a imprint coming out from DC Comics. It was called Vertigo. And there was a lot of comics which were new and inventive and well written. And it was when people started to say things like, wow, comics can be good. And of course, I'm referring to The Sandman from 1989, written by Neil Gaiman, of course. And also is got a pretty popular Netflix series going.
Yeah, and again, you're cheating there. You know, Sandman dances that line in there. He pulls in a couple of DC characters every once in a while.
Yeah. I know he's kind of on the line, right? But I don't know if he would be. I don't think anybody would classify him as a hero necessarily. Although
no, and again, just like Constantine, it's almost fitting because they were the ones who really, they almost like metaphorically pulled us away from superheroes.
Right.
They started with their foot in there, and then they were like, let's go over here, and you were like, oh yeah, let's follow Sandman. He's great. And I feel bad. This is a bad comics fan. I've not read enough Neil Gaiman. I've only read the first omnibus of Sandman. It's amazing. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my hero in comics, and that's Sam Keith. You know, of course, started the series. Again, if we mentioned, just like we should have said with BKB, all of these amazing writers know how to pick artists or get teamed up with the right artists. So it started with Sam Keith, and then of course continued with Mike Dergenberg. Amazing, just surreal, like living art through all the art in Sandman. It's just an amazing adventure.
Remember, he did those wild covers too with Dave McKean, which are multimedia pieces, and it's like some of it's painted, some of it's photographed, and they're like baby doll heads and just all kinds of weirdness. And I can remember I bought that new off the shelf in 1989 because I had been following this Vertigo imprint, and I didn't realize it then, but I realize it now. I was trying to broaden my horizons as a reader because in the 80s, I was starting to, I should say late 80s, early 90s, I was kind of outgrowing the other comics. And by the way, I realized there was tons of good ones. I'm not besmirching anybody else. But when you saw the Sandman on the newsstand, you instantly went, what the heck is this? It was so odd and so weird. And then, of course, you read it and it's this, it's like a Victorian Gothic horror story, almost about Greek gods, kind of.
Yeah.
And it definitely wasn't what I expected, but I was hooked. And man, I can remember going back and, every month I would buy the next issue. And of course, I became a huge Death fan. And I'm even a little bit of a statue collector of like my Death statues,
Nice. I can see why.
Yeah, that was one of those characters who, hey, by the way, have you seen the Netflix series?
I have. Yeah, very well done. Every episode I watched, I was like, I'm surprised they gave them this much control. It's very much, they changed the parts that needed to be changed.
Yeah, very literal retelling.
Yeah, it's like, it's crazy.
Yeah, and a little.
Oh, good.
I was saying a little bit of a controversy with the casting, right? Because that was the one where they recast Death as a person of color, which not everybody loved that.
Right.
But I guess if the quality is a good product, that'll still stand up. I'm not sure what the right answer is. As a statue collector, I was a little disappointed. I can tell you,
sure.
Okay.
Right.
But I'm smart enough to keep my mouth shut on the other stuff. But it's very well written.
Yeah. Well, yeah. He's involved with it, so he has a lot of. Finally got to the point where he felt like they'd make a good adaptation. So, yeah. And I again, bad comics fan. I read that way after it came out. I was well into my 30s. Read some more, after the lead up to the series, coming out, because it really only covers that first volume or two.
Right.
But I definitely will finish the series. Again, it's one that, I can see exactly why it's so revered,
Oh, yeah. And I'd like to recommend, if anybody's a fan of this kind of material, I was a Neil Gaiman fan, and not just the Sandman. This one I couldn't put on the list, though. His other book, Black Orchid, which that's got the the hand painted interiors by Dave McKean. And the only reason it didn't make it is Black Orchid, she's a hero, so she's not going to make it on the list. But it's one of those reimaginings that's really trippy, kind of.
Nice. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it has like little snippets of poetry in it, and it's got lots of double splash pages. But even as you go through, the other characters in the DC universe make appearances, like the Swamp Thing's in there, Batman's even in it. So it's like, okay, this one can't go on the list. This is going to be too close to a hero book. But yeah, the Sandman, it'd be fair to say that the Sandman definitely influenced my writing.
And many, many, many other people for a good reason.
Yeah. I've been a Neil Gaiman fan for years, and it's funny. I look back on that and say, geez, it all kind of started with the Sandman. I have that omnibus too, or at least maybe it's like the big leather book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my mom got me that for Christmas last year, and I love that book. It's just
Nice.
So let's move on to number 3. This is from 2002. Our number 3 is Why the Last Man. Again, there's Brian K. Vaughan on our list.
Brian K. Vaughan. I never did watch the series that came out. I didn't hear it got the best reviews, but
yeah, it was. I didn't watch the series either, but the beef about the series was, the book was very specific about. Well, if you remember, it's basically the world is populated by women, and he's the last man to survive, and it had something to do with their DNA, and there's lots of scientific explanation. But I guess that was in the series. They, I don't want to cross into this too much, but networks, they always want to include woke content, so they had to rewrite it so that it wasn't necessarily women, like you could identify as a woman and still survive. And I think the fans instantly went, wait, that's the whole premise, and it doesn't make any sense now. So but I didn't see it, so please don't take that as me criticizing it. That's one I didn't see, and it wasn't because I objected to that. It's because it was on a streaming service that I didn't have. It was on Hulu, was it? Maybe.
Yeah, I think so. That sounds right. Yeah, and I was the same. I didn't have access to it. So, but as far as the comic, again, BKV, pretty much everything he does should be on lists like these. He hasn't done too much that I haven't liked, and this was another one. I guess, gosh, is this 20 years old now too? I feel.
Yeah, it's 20 years old, man.
And again, at the time, I was just looking for different books, trying to do different things, break away from my Marvel addiction, and this was another one that was well into its series at the time. Caught up on it, and it's just an amazing run. I've only read it once, though. I still have it here on the shelf, but I never did go back and read it again. But I really would like to. I wish I could, again for the first time. But he just has this, just his writing style. There's just so much emotion to the characters, and why himself is this kind of, like a lot of us, this, dopey, nerdy guy, and doesn't know why he got thrust into this situation that seems impossible.
And I think Brian K. Vaughan has a great sense for drama too. And like, for example, one of the scenes that sticks with me here, it's 20 years later, I remember it. Remember, there's some astronauts that survived because they weren't on planet Earth, and they crashed to Earth in their capsule, and they're all getting ready to get out of the pod. And oh my God, thank God there's a couple of human males that survived, and the capsule catches fire. And he goes, women and children first. And they both grab the female astronaut and they help her out the door. And then the capsule explodes, killing both men.
I actually forgot that part.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah. He so not everybody can do drama and romance and not have it come off real cheesy. And he just has like a natural, which it makes sense why he's transitioned to some TV writing and other things. Yeah.
Right. And I was going to say, one of the things that I've noticed about him, and I mean this as a compliment, not as any kind of detriment, he writes like a screenplay style. And what I mean by that is, he tends to use a lot of cliffhangers at the end of chapters, and, things like that. And I guess it would be, I'd have to mention that was, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, that was illustrated by Pia Guerra. And just unforgettable artwork on that book. And I feel it really, boy, just what a terrific job creating that world.
Absolutely.
Now, while we're on the Brian K. Vaughan train, man, our number 2, Saga from 2012. The first time I read Saga, and of course I picked it up because I was already a Brian K. Vaughan fan. At the time I was, I had a retail comic book store at the time. I don't know if I ever told you that, but I used to have a store. And this book had a little bit of hype around it. They're like, man, if you like sci-fi, you got to check out Saga. And one of the things that I love so much about what Brian K. Vaughan did is like, he just pulled the gloves off and said, I'm going to make characters that are so weird that all of you are going to be like, just, dumbstruck. And I was, and it's easy to say, I'm going to make a weird character because then maybe you don't really care about it. It's too weird. But he created these completely weird, surreal characters and then made you totally invested your emotions into them. And, they've got the same thing too with the interstellar war and these grand and epic, things that are happening in the background. But at the end of the day, Saga's a love story, right? It's these two characters that are in love and, they're trying to protect their baby and that kind of thing. So well done.
Yeah. And, as we've mentioned a few times, Fiona Staples, again, Brian K. Vaughan's like, all right, I got this story. How do I make it legendary? Okay, I'll grab, the best artist for the job. And she's amazing. I have actually only read the first 10 issues, and I'll be honest, some of what you mentioned with the weird characters being weird, I'm like, you know what, let me let this series wrap up and then we'll see. Right. And I'm actually glad I did, because I wasn't digging it as much, and then it took a long hiatus. So I think I'll get back to it when it wraps up, because I trust BKV. But this would be probably the only one of his where I wasn't over the moon with it right away.
No kidding.
Like Pride of Baghdad or Why the Last Man, where they're just my own.
Man, Pride of Baghdad too. That could have put a spot on the list with that one.
Absolutely.
Was that released episodic? I only had the graphic novel version.
I think it was straight to, yep. I think Vertigo did straight to graphic novel.
Gotcha. Yeah,
but yes, good. I can understand Saga's influence, and the reason Saga belongs on a list like this is because it's one of the few books in this modern age of the last 10 years that really just has this buzz and sells out like crazy, and just not every book, most books don't do that anymore. Right. So it's just a phenomenon in itself, and because of all the reasons you said, it's a perfect marriage of art and writing and weirdness, and that's what people want out of comics.
yeah, it really is, man. And some of the visual stuff that they had done would be some of the, it would be difficult to replicate even in film, like with the special effects, or I guess nothing's impossible these days.
No.
But they got the character with the TV head and the lying cat, it's all very odd. And by the way, you're not wrong, John. The first time I read it, if you read the first one, it's like, what? And then you read 6 and you're like, this doesn't even make any sense. And then you read 10 and you're like, well, are they going to make it? And then you read 20 and you're like, oh my God, what happens next?
Yeah.
Because it's, and again, I say this without any, this isn't a negative to me. It's very much like a soap opera type thing where you get so hooked, you got to see what happens next.
Yeah, and I can appreciate a writer like that who suffers no fools. And even though it's in periodical form, he knows there's a longer form story. And right. You got to stick around if you want to figure it out.
Hey, and John, based on that, I want to ask you a quick creator question. When you're plotting out your stories, I'm going to ask you a little bit about your writing technique, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Do you ever, when you start a series and say it's going to run for X amount of issues, do you write it with the ending in mind right away, or do you set the characters on the train and kind of wait and see what happens?
I definitely have endings in mind. I think I have trouble starting if I don't know where it's going to go eventually. 15 years ago when I started, I definitely was like, oh, this is fun. Let's just meander around for a while. And then I realized, I was kind of holding the artist hostage, kind of trying to get to a point. So I definitely, I try to come in with something in mind. There's at least a couple waypoints along the way where they're going. Yeah. Before I kind of get the series kicked off, but I'm definitely let it flow in between person, and I probably shouldn't be. I take manic notes, and I have all these notes about all these cool moments and things that are going to happen in beginning, middle, and end type of stuff.
Yeah.
But then once I start seeing the art, I'm real bad with that's kind of cool. What, this character needs more lines, or this character needs to go this way, and then even my series now, which you mentioned, Drumsticks of Doom, was a 3-issue arc. Now it's already ballooned into 4, and it'll that's just the first part. So who knows? The next 10 issues are going to end up being 40. So I'm very, very bad with that. But I like that because comics is, you can do that, right? It's not a TV show. I don't have to have all 12 issues or episodes written out,
Correct. And it's a little bit like, and thanks for such an honest answer, because I'm a little bit like that too. There is an element of creativity which I call flowering, and sometimes, let's say you're 2 issues in, and it's like you said, it's like it might be cool right here. And it's sort of it's like another tentacle coming out of an octopus, or this character should have more lines, like you said. That's a great one, and I definitely do that.
And definitely when working with artists too, you see that character, and then all of a sudden they gain their personality, and then it's just like, characters that I had no plans for after one scene, all of a sudden I want them to come back. So I think that's a fun way to do it. And I probably shouldn't do that as much because it ends up ballooning out of control. But
Yeah.
That's how
Well,
I am.
and I totally get that, brother. And let me tell you, I'm the same way. And I love to develop characters. And when they get to that level, it almost kind of starts to write itself, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. And then you kind of hit that moment where, yeah, then you're like, oh no, because you know, again, when you're have an idea of even, 10 or 12 plot points in a short series,
Yeah.
you don't just want to mechanically get to them, you want to organically get to them. So when you get those moments and you're like, oh, this is how this ties into here,
Mm-hmm.
it sometimes can be hard because sometimes you're already 2 issues in and you're like, oh, I wish I had, gone back and
Put
put
something
that in the
in.
first,
Yeah.
but
I think I might have mentioned it before. I do something that's a little weird, I guess, as far as writers go, which is I write mine backwards. I do the ending first and then I write back to how they got there. That's something that I picked up. I was reading, I read books on the craft of writing and that kind of thing. And I'm sure you do too. But, I've never written any of these, but these murder mysteries, did you know that that's the tip for writing murder mysteries? You write them backwards. You start with, well, the butler did it with the candlestick in the dining room, right? And then how did he get there?
I only know that because they made a joke about it in The Simpsons.
Yeah, like the game
the
Clue,
murder
right?
mystery. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, that's what I do is I always try to include what I call an emotional component in the stories. As you know, most of my stories are shorts, right? They're not always long arcs. Like usually in one book, you're going to have a conclusion to your story. But I start with what I feel is like an emotional ending. When I say emotional, maybe that's not quite exactly the right word, but some kind of punch. And then I write backwards of how they got there.
I like that. I should try that sometime.
Yeah, it works for me. But I still do what you said though, because you still end up on, page 7. Man, wouldn't it be cool right here if blah 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 blah. So it helps if you have an artist that really trusts you and trusts what you're doing.
Yeah.
So speaking of emotional character arcs, number 1, The Walking Dead from 2003.
The Walking Dead, I mentioned Saga and being a modern phenomenon. I mean, this is the modern phenomenon, right?
The modern phenomenon.
So many issues and people are so excited about it. It's getting people into reading comics, and it has this, probably too long running TV show, and created Kirkman manifestos, and all kinds of things happen in our community because of this book.
Right.
And a big part of, I mean, not 100% like I mentioned, but a huge part of me really branching out into more black and white books. I'm so glad that they kept that going, that they didn't, change course. It started, of course, with the amazing Tony Moore.
Right, Tony Moore. I'm a fan.
One of my favorite artists of all time. Wish he did more comics.
Yeah.
And then, of course, handed off to Charlie Adler. But yes, both were amazing. A big part of the story to me is this, I don't know, something about that black and white feel. It makes you kind of fill in what it looks like, and I just think it's great. It is a series like Fables where it's gone on a long time, and I've reached a point in the series where I was like, I no longer can emotionally handle attaching myself to these characters just to have him, stab them in the eyeballs with forks and all kinds of shit. Right. So I got to a point where I was like, yeah, I'm good. And but I respect the hell out of the series and what it meant really for the community overall.
Well said. Well said. That's definitely something where, and of course I can remember when it was new, when it came out, and I didn't get on board right away. I think I came in, it was right around the time the governor was in there. But then I quickly went back and I, bought everything up. They used to come in these 6-issue trades. Each one is a little arc, right?
Yeah.
And of course I had bought all the trades at the time. And I'm a comic collector as well. You are too, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's one of the things I do have is I have a nice Walking Dead 1 to 100 set with all the variants and everything else.
Oh, nice. I think I started like issue 7 or something. So I missed like the big initial wave. And then, but I ended up, moving that series. But yeah, that was one that was fun to pick up as it came out. And it, again, for a long time comic reader to be excited about, your pull list and is, The Walking Dead in it. And then when I eventually switched to trades, when's the next trade coming out? I remember for a long time. And again, I definitely got to a point where I had enough with being abused, but, I definitely respect those who've kind of hung in there.
Well, and he did something kind of cool. And by the way, I'm like you, I didn't follow it this far because I felt well, I mean, they want to say this the wrong way, but once you started getting past about 100 or so, the story started to lack a little impact. I thought, like, it just didn't have the same weight anymore. That's one man's opinion.
I could see
But
that.
yeah, but I would say that for especially those first 6 trades, what's that, 72 issues, man, they just packed a punch. And it was something where, like you said, the characters were so well developed. You had to be like, man, I got to see what's going on. I got to see what happened with Andrea. I got to see what happened with Michonne. You know, it was something that you could really get wrapped up in.
Yeah, and just him at the height of his writing prowess. Again, which is hard in a series like that. You can't kill everyone off every week and not build up more characters. So he always found a way to just, these likable characters, even though, a lot of them were grimy and doing horrible things to survive in this horrible time.
Right.
Taking a really a simple premise that had been around for a while, zombie apocalypse.
Yeah.
That's not easy, right? Because the supernatural is in the zombies, but outside of that, it's not like, it's just people surviving because they've reached this impossible situation. And it's very hard to, like you said, I get after 100 or so issues, it gets a little repetitive, but for a long run, it was like he just kept introducing new things, and you're just like, it was just exciting and new, and just totally blew up the whole zombie thing. So
yeah, and you make a good point, John, in the sense that I think as a reader, you could make a strong argument that the series isn't necessarily about the zombies all that much. It's about the people and the trauma that they have to go through.
Which is what's the best part of all of that media that we watch like that, but difficult to do in a 90-minute movie. So he found a way, I'm going to make this long-running comic series. Or, well, he may not have planned it at the time, but he certainly did a great job with his team in making it the best of its zombie media.
Yeah, and as a publisher, I find it really interesting that and I remember all this because I was in the time you'd order comics for your store and that kind of thing. And when you talk about, if you're going to order books for your store, well, I'll just cut to the chase. That first issue of Walking Dead #1 had a print run of under 6,500 copies.
I thought it was even lower than that.
Yeah, by all accounts, that's a tiny print run. That realistically, you and I are probably getting close to a number like that.
No,
maybe not, but my point is, when you start talking about comics in their heyday, would be print runs in the millions.
Right, or even like a hit these days, 100,000. So yeah, it was
right.
Interesting
like,
that it
Walking
hung in
Dead
there.
was 6,500.
I did not know that.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? And
that's why it's so hot, because
right. I'm glad you mentioned that. I do. Hey, are you a fan of graded books at all, like a CGC book or anything like that?
I can't say I'm a fan of them. The only one that I have is a buddy of mine, if I have it here, graded my own book for me, which was nice. But
oh, nice. Yeah. I do that for my backers now.
Yeah, I keep saying I'm going to send mine off to CGC. I have like the ones where I pull them out and they look pristine, but I just haven't. They're going to get bent by the time I do it.
Yeah. Well, if you ever want to get together, that's something we could do together.
Nice.
But where I was going with it was that, a lot of the books have what I call an inflated market value. And what I mean by that is that these books aren't necessarily very rare. Like when you talk about some of these old Silver Age books, like, let's say Amazing Fantasy 15. Well, the reason why it does crazy amounts of money is because there aren't any other ones.
Right.
But when you get
threw them away or
people threw them away and they're very rare.
Yeah.
So when you get to some of the moderns and you see these big numbers, and when I say big numbers, even, a couple of $100, that's way too much for something that there's still 25,000 copies out there in the wild. That's not a rare book.
Right.
So it isn't necessarily rarity that's driving the value of it. And I love to talk about the small economies of the comic industry, but something like Walking Dead 1, you got yourself a rare book if you got one.
Yeah.
Rare in the grand
was
scheme.
Another example, right? Chew #1 was like, we're under 10,000 because of those image books. They, printed them to order, and then, then people didn't figure it out till the second or third issue. Well, now the first run's already done. So yeah.
Right. And I guess they're even going back now, and that's one of the ones that was recolored.
Yep. Yeah, I did hear that.
I haven't seen any of the colored ones, but it was, I read in an interview that one of the decisions of why they did black and white, #1 was for budgetary reasons, which it seems hilarious now. But the other reason was because they felt that particularly with the artwork of Charlie Adlard, that the black and white lent itself toward not being censored by Americans. Meaning, like, if everything was splashed red everywhere and eyeballs, it would look a lot worse, so to speak, in color, if you know what I mean.
Oh, I hadn't heard that. But yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely did hear about the budget thing, that they were like, well, we're doing it on our own. We're at Image. We're new.
Yeah.
Tony Moore, that young creator at the time.
Yeah, right. And isn't it funny that when you talk about, because look, let's be honest, some of the characters that the founders of Image, you got your Liefeld and Portasio and, titans of the industry, right? And here comes little Robert Kirkman and basically smashed every record they had. So,
yep. Amazing.
There's life in comics, man.
There's life, man. He gave us
there's
life.
life there. So that's our conclusion of our top 11 non-hero comic titles. Viewers, if you'd like to agree with us, or especially if you'd like to disagree with us, please share your opinions in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. And while we're on the subject of these types of books, I think that if you like sort of unusual titles and something that's a little bit off the beaten path, I think you'd like the works of Jon Westhoff and his latest titles. I'm a fan of his work, as I said, and we're going to talk a little bit about the project that you have coming up, which is your new Kickstarter, which is for 2 titles. That's Drumsticks of Doom, which I love, and Depowered, which I don't think I've seen Depowered yet. I read the blurb of it, but Jon, can you tell us a little bit about 2 things? First, what were your inspirations for these 2 books, and what can we expect with the new release?
Well, thank you so much. And I definitely, I influenced by a lot of the works we talked about, but I cannot, compare myself in any way to these amazing writers. But I try, about 15 years ago, I, met up with some people on a message board and decided to do some comics. Really didn't have any desire to be a writer or anything like that. Just thought, I'm kind of transitioning out of being in a band and kind of need some sort of creative outlet, and kind of just interested in it. And it's just kind of snowballed from there. So now I think this will be my 13th Kickstarter. I think my 15th crowdfunder overall. The 4th one in the last year. So yeah, things have been rolling good. The company I'm with now, I'm the sole proprietor for Part-Time Comics.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And yeah, so Tim had mentioned, he may even put graphics up, but we have our smash hit success from last year, Drumsticks of Doom.
That's cool. I have that one. That's awesome.
We have these amazing metal covers, if you can see them, shining,
cool,
from
man.
Maria Wolf. Drumsticks of Doom, first and foremost, is inspired. One of the people who's mentioned today, Tim and I did not even talk about it, but for him to mention Scott Pilgrim was, I definitely enjoyed that, because that's definitely an influence. Musical comics like Doom Boy, Scott Pilgrim, Moonhead and the Music Machines is another one. These comics that just they put music on the page, a silent page, and you feel the music coming back at you. Just enthralled me for so many years. So much so that I started a music themed anthology called Banthology when I was with Kingbone Press. A couple of buddies of mine, we realized, hey, all these comic creators around us are also musicians. Let's make comics about music, and we'll do a music themed anthology. And we did 3 volumes of it. That's how I met the artist Dan Doherty, who's the main artist for Drumsticks of Doom. And I wanted to do a book with him ever since I saw his story in the first Banthology, which was about a musician who gets that desire to play live on stage and can never shake it. And I was like, wow, he literally just nailed that feeling that you get at being a young musician, and you can never get rid of it, no matter how, well, especially for those of us who didn't really have the big successes, or maybe had a small taste of it and never really got back there. So
yeah,
and that is a big part of what inspired me too, seeing Dan's stories. And then he's also a working musician and an amazing artist. And so I pitched it to him, finally got off my ass after like 7 years sitting on the story, and said, hey Dan, do you have time to draw this? And he's like, yeah, let's do it. So we're on the 3rd issue now. We have an amazing cover here, and hopefully Tim can put the graphic up for us.
We're gonna while we're on the subject, so we're gonna have a graphic here. This is the grand reveal of the new
grand
cover.
Reveal. Drum roll, please, for Drumsticks of Doom. The awesome cover, and for those of you who are into Tim's other hobby of music, you might recognize the heavy metal homage here. We have the amazing cover by Dan Doherty, which of course is a tribute to the Hail to England album by Manowar, which is a huge inspiration for the for the story in general.
All men play on 10.
All men play on 10. The original pitch for Drumsticks of Doom was, what if Man-O-War lyrics were real in this day and age? And then I was like, well, nobody's going to read that but me. So I would,
brother. I would.
So then I was like, well, what's the story outside of that? And we have a young woman who, in a world of heavy metal, where Black Sabbath was the most popular band in the world, not the Beatles, she just wants to play her indie pop music. Well, in this case, in a world of heavy metal, that's pretty tough. So she's still playing in her fledgling high school metal band after she's out of high school, and she's just trying to figure out her way when these magical drumsticks come to her. And she's thrust into a battle between heavy metal and the non-heavy metal fans. So we're only 3 issues in. It's the first arc is 4 issues. Should be wrapping up this spring or early summer. And it's been my biggest, financial and backing success since I've started. So, I'm really happy to see the 3rd issue coming out soon.
Well, congratulations, Jon. I think it's a great concept. And just in closing, I want to say, I think you're a heck of a guy, and I appreciate what you do for the indie community. And you're one of those guys who you walk the walk as well as talk the talk. I see the way that you supported the other creators, and you're very motivational and very positive, and including with supporting my project. So, man, I just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, and it's kind of awkward because I had a book last year, which you mentioned, you hadn't even really heard of, because I'm kind of always talking about drumsticks, but we had another book last year, which was Depowered. And, we kind of stumbled, and it kind of made me like, well, can I do this? Did I do it at the right time? Did I push too hard? But we're back for issue 2. So I'm kind of sandwiching them into one campaign because it's
so your current campaign, and by the way, viewers, I will put the pre-launch link into the comments. So if you're inclined to follow Jon's project, please check that out. I'll put the link down there. And so I understand this correctly. This is a sort of a 2-for-1. It
is a 2-for-1. Not always advisable, because sometimes it's hard to pitch, 2 books at once, but
right.
Both of them, I think, are a couple issues in now. So hopefully we've got, the word of mouth with the books will be there. But Depowered had a bit of a stumble last year.
What do you mean by a stumble, Jon?
Well, I had an unsuccessful Kickstarter. I hadn't had one in many years. Set the goal a little bit too aggressive. Then I tried to do an Indiegogo. That colossally failed. Didn't even get 10 backers. Then I did a straight to website pre-order, and bless the hearts of the 57 people that ordered it. Was nowhere near where I needed to be. So I kind of was faced with, do I shelve the book? Do I keep relaunching it? Do I keep making the same mistake? So I kind of sat on it for a while, and now we're ready to come back for issue 2. I'm done feeling sorry for myself and licking my wounds. We got the team back together. So we have the awesome team of
you got the band back together.
Bob Ornelas, Ronaldo Lay, Don Cardenas on colors, and John Bourne is doing some additional art for us. We've got amazing, again, you can click on the campaign and see all the awesome covers and things that we have. So I appreciate that the team kind of sat on it for a little while. It didn't launch how we wanted to, but I think it's a strong book. You mentioned this episode was about non-superhero books, and in a way, this one is like our Constantine friend or Sandman. This is about ex-superheroes, what they did after they lost their powers. So as we mentioned with, I mentioned Powers, by Brian Michael Bendis earlier. These are the kind of books that I like, where if you're going to do superheroes, we don't ever really see them in their costumes or anything like that. It's more about, and again, in the case of Dax, our main character, he lost his powers 10 years ago, and he kind of just sat around feeling sorry for himself. He wrote a tell-all book about his peers that didn't go over too well, and now he's going around on the convention circuit kind of selling it when he has something stolen out of his hotel room, and he's thrust back into trying to figure out where he stands as a person and as an ex-superhero that's lost his powers.
That sounds great, man. That's something I'll definitely give you a follow. And I want to say thanks for coming on the show. This was a really fun one, man. I enjoyed talking to you. And, I think that, what is the date set yet for the Kickstarter launch?
I'm going to say late January, because as well as we do that these things are in flux. So we're hoping for the last week of January, as long as all things come into line, including a little bit delayed with the printer and mailing out issue 2 of Drumstick. So I want to respect the backers and get them that first. So, a lot of things in play, but soon. So give it a follow so that you make sure you see it when it launches.
Perfect. We will definitely do so, Jon. And I just want to thank you again for being on the show. It's a real pleasure.
No, thank you so much. I had a great time.
All right, for our viewers at home, of course, I have a project I will just pitch to you briefly. This week, Water Wars 2288 Volume 4 goes to print, and that should be arriving in backers' mailboxes sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks, roughly, that should take. And I'll just throw up a quick preview here for you of number 5, which this one's going to be a banger. That is a science fiction horror story called Ascendance of the Terramorph. And I'm going to show you some graphics there. That's designed by Mr. Erwin Arosa, my erstwhile partner in creating our universe. So I will look forward to bringing that one to the masses on Kickstarter. That mine is probably more likely going to be March, something like that. So for the viewers, I want to say thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate that you guys keep coming back. We had a great time talking about the top 11 non-hero comic titles. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thanks to the viewers and thanks to Mr. Jon Westhoff. Thanks, everybody, and have a great night.